3 years ago, David Mitchell looked me straight in the eye during our team meeting and said those words that still echo in my mind. "Sarah, you're absolutely worthless to this company. You'll never be anything more than a coffee-fetching assistant." Last Tuesday, I walked into that same conference room, sat in his chair, and handed him his termination letter as the new CEO of Summit Digital Solutions. The look on his face when he realized his former worthless employee was now his boss was absolutely priceless. But getting there required a level of strategic planning that would make a chess grandmaster proud. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of the Morrison Tower always gave everyone a slightly sickly appearance, but that Tuesday morning they seemed particularly harsh as I stared at my computer screen, watching the cursor blink in the empty email composition window. My hands trembled slightly as I tried to formulate the words that would change everything. The subject line read simply, "Resignation Letter, Sarah Chen, Marketing Department." But this wasn't just any resignation letter. This was the culmination of 3 years of careful documentation, strategic alliance building, and patient planning that was about to demolish David Mitchell's career while launching mine into the stratosphere. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was typing this letter on the same computer where I'd created the Phoenix campaign analytics software that had saved Summit Digital Solutions over $2 million in the past year alone. Software that David had proudly presented to our biggest client, Meridian Industries, without mentioning my name once. Software that had earned him a $15,000 bonus, while I continued to make my modest $45,000 salary, struggling to pay off student loans and help my younger brother Marcus with his college tuition. My cubicle sat in the middle of the marketing floor, surrounded by the constant chatter of phone calls and keyboard clicking. From my desk, I had a perfect view of David's corner office with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland. He was in there now, feet up on his mahogany desk, probably planning how to take credit for the Riverside tech proposal I'd spent the entire weekend perfecting. The same proposal that would likely secure his promotion to vice president if it landed successfully. The memory of yesterday's incident was still fresh and raw. I had been presenting my quarterly analytics report to the senior management team when David interrupted me mid-sentence. "Actually, let me take over here, Sarah. This is pretty complex stuff, and I don't want you to confuse anyone with the technical details." The humiliation of being dismissed like a child in front of Linda Watson, our CEO, and the other department heads was suffocating. I had sat there in stunned silence as David proceeded to present my work, my insights, my recommendations, as if they were his own brilliant strategies. What made it worse was that he got several key details wrong, details that I desperately wanted to correct but couldn't without appearing insubordinate. When Linda asked about the methodology behind the customer retention predictions, David stumbled through an explanation that made no technical sense. I watched his face flush red as he clearly had no understanding of the algorithms I'd developed. Yet somehow he managed to deflect by saying, "Sarah can send you the technical documentation later. The important thing is the results we're seeing." That evening, I had stayed late in the office, not because I had work to finish, but because I needed time to think without David's constant surveillance. He had this habit of walking by my cubicle every 30 minutes, ostensibly to check on projects, but really to ensure I wasn't slacking off, as he so eloquently put it. The cleaning crew had already made their rounds when I finally gathered the courage to access the company's internal files to check something that had been nagging at me for months. What I discovered made my blood run cold. In the digital project archives, I found email chains dating back to my first major campaign success, the Cascade Coffee rebranding that had won a regional advertising award. In the original emails, my name appeared as the lead strategist and creative director. But in the versions that had been forwarded to upper management and filed in our official records, my name had been systematically removed and replaced with David's. This wasn't just taking credit for recent work. This was historical revisionism on a corporate scale. The pattern was consistent across dozens of projects over the past 3 years. Every successful campaign, every innovative strategy, every cost-saving measure I had implemented had been quietly reassigned to David in the official records. Meanwhile, any projects that had failed or underperformed somehow remained attributed to me. It was a sophisticated gaslighting operation that had been happening right under my nose, and I had been too trusting, too focused on doing good work, to notice the systematic theft of my professional identity. I printed everything. Every email, every project file, every piece of evidence that proved the scope of David's deception. The printer in the corner of the office seemed impossibly loud in the empty building. But I needed physical copies of everything in case David tried to delete or alter the digital files. By the time I finished, I had a stack of papers nearly 3 inches thick, representing 3 years of stolen work and suppressed career advancement. The next morning, David called an impromptu team meeting. As I walked into conference room B, I noticed Rebecca Torres from senior management was there, along with Tom Bradley from HR. David's face had that smug expression he wore whenever he was about to deliver what he considered devastating news. "Sarah," he began, his voice carrying that condescending tone I had learned to dread, "we need to discuss your performance and future with this company." He pulled out a folder that he dramatically placed on the conference table. "I've been reviewing your work over the past year, and frankly, it's been disappointing. The Phoenix campaign analytics, while adequate, showed basic errors in methodology. Your client presentations lack the sophistication we expect at this level. And your attitude during yesterday's meeting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." It was unprofessional and disruptive. I felt my face flush with anger, but I remained silent, letting him continue his character assassination. "Now, I'm not unreasonable," David continued, clearly enjoying himself. "I'm willing to offer you a performance improvement plan. You'll be reassigned to junior-level tasks under direct supervision. Your salary will be adjusted accordingly, and you'll need to demonstrate significant improvement over the next 90 days, or we'll have to consider other options." Rebecca shifted uncomfortably in her chair, and I could see Tom frantically taking notes. This was clearly a setup, a formal process designed to either force me out or demote me to a position where I couldn't threaten David's narrative of being the department's creative genius. "Do you have any questions about this plan, Sarah?" David asked, his tone suggesting that any questions would be seen as further evidence of my inadequacy. This was my moment. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a folder of my own, much thicker than his. "Actually, David, I do have some questions. But first, I think Rebecca and Tom should see something." I opened my folder and began distributing copies of the email chains, project files, and documentation I had compiled. These are the original project files for every major campaign our department has worked on for the past 3 years, showing the actual creators and contributors. David's face went pale as Rebecca began flipping through the pages. "What you'll notice," I continued, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "is a pattern of systematic credit reassignment. Here's the original Cascade Coffee campaign with my name as lead strategist. Here's the version that was sent to upper management, with David's name substituted. Here's the Phoenix campaign analytics software with creation timestamps showing I developed it in my personal time, followed by David's presentation claiming it as his own work." The room was completely silent, except for the sound of pages turning. Tom Bradley's expression shifted from confused to alarmed as he realized the legal implications of what he was seeing. Rebecca, who had always been fair but distant, was now studying the documents with the intensity of a forensic accountant. "This is ridiculous," David sputtered, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Sarah, you're clearly misunderstanding the collaborative nature of our work environment. As department director, I oversee all projects, so naturally my name appears on final submissions." "Then explain this," I said, sliding another document across the table. It was a client feedback form from Meridian Industries, specifically praising, quote, Sarah Chen's innovative approach to predictive analytics, and requesting that I personally handle their next campaign. This was sent directly to Linda Watson last month. Meridian Industries specifically asked to work with me again, but somehow I never heard about this request. Rebecca looked up sharply. "David, did you receive this client feedback?" Her tone had shifted from neutral to investigative. David's hands were visibly shaking now. "I may have overlooked it. We get a lot of client correspondence. You overlooked a $2 million client, specifically requesting one of your team members? Tom Bradley interjected, his HR training kicking in as he recognized a potential lawsuit in the making. I pulled out one final document, the piece of evidence I had been saving for maximum impact. This is an email David sent to me 6 months ago. I read it aloud. Sarah, your work on the Morrison account was completely inadequate. The client was dissatisfied with your strategy and specifically requested that I handle all future communications. You clearly don't understand sophisticated client management. I paused to let that sink in before continuing. Here's the actual client feedback from Morrison Industries, sent the same week. Sarah Chen's strategic insight and creative vision exceeded all our expectations. We're amazed by her ability to understand our brand identity and translate it into measurable results. Please ensure she remains our primary point of contact. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. 3 years of systematic credit theft, client feedback manipulation, and career sabotage laid out in black and white. Rebecca was no longer just reviewing the documents. She was studying David with the expression of someone who had just discovered a major security breach in her own organization. David, Rebecca said carefully, I think we need to postpone Sarah's performance review and schedule a different kind of meeting. Tom, please ensure these documents are secured and copied for our records. Sarah, would you be available to meet with Linda Watson this afternoon? The power dynamic in the room had completely shifted. David, who had walked in expecting to humiliate and demote me, was now facing the collapse of his carefully constructed facade. Rebecca, I think there's been a misunderstanding here. Sarah has always been a valuable team member, and if there have been communication issues, I'm sure we can resolve them. But it was too late for damage control. The evidence was too comprehensive, too well documented, and too damaging to explain away as miscommunication. Rebecca stood up, gathered the documents, and looked directly at David. We'll be conducting a full review of all department projects and client relationships. I suggest you clear your calendar for the rest of the week. As we filed out of the conference room, David grabbed my arm. Sarah, wait. I think you're making a huge mistake here. You're biting the hand that feeds you. I've been protecting you, guiding your career. This could destroy everything we've built together. I looked at his hand on my arm, then directly into his eyes. David, the only thing you've built is a lie. And lies always eventually collapse under their own weight. I gently removed his hand and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the conference room, finally understanding that his reign of manipulation and credit theft was over. That afternoon, I sat in Linda Watson's office, a space I had only seen briefly during company meetings. The CEO listened intently as I walked through the evidence, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting me tell the complete story. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, she finally said, I owe you an apology. This company failed you, and I failed you personally, by not creating an environment where this kind of behavior would be impossible. She gestured to the documents spread across her desk. What you've shown me represents not just personal misconduct, but a fundamental breach of our corporate values and potentially serious legal liability. She stood up and walked to her window, looking out over downtown Portland. I've been concerned about our marketing department's inconsistent performance despite having what I believed was strong leadership. Now I understand that we haven't had leadership at all. We've had someone actively sabotaging his own team's success for personal gain. Linda turned back to me with an expression I had never seen from her before. Respect mixed with something that looked like calculation. Sarah, I have a proposition for you, but I want you to think carefully before you respond. We're facing some significant challenges as a company, and we need leaders who have both technical expertise and unquestionable integrity. Would you be interested in taking on a much larger role in helping us address these challenges? The conversation that followed would change the trajectory of my entire career. Linda explained that Summit Digital Solutions was in the middle of acquisition talks with TechVantage Corp, but the deal was contingent on demonstrating improved operational efficiency and team performance. The marketing department's dysfunction under David's leadership had become a significant obstacle to completing the acquisition successfully. What I'm about to tell you is confidential, Linda continued, but TechVantage has specifically mentioned the Phoenix campaign analytics as one of our most valuable assets. They're impressed by the innovation and want to ensure that whoever created it would be part of their long-term plans. She smiled slightly. They've been asking to meet with David to discuss expanding the analytics platform company-wide. I suspect they're going to be very interested to learn who actually developed it. Over the next 2 hours, Linda and I discussed a plan that was both simple and revolutionary. Rather than just firing David and promoting someone internally, Summit Digital Solutions would restructure the entire marketing department around proven performance and documented results. I would be appointed as interim marketing director, with the understanding that if I could successfully lead the department through the acquisition process, the position would become permanent, with a substantial increase in responsibility and compensation. There's one more thing, Linda said as our meeting was concluding. TechVantage is looking for someone to head their new digital innovation division once the acquisition is complete. It's essentially a C-level position, reporting directly to their board of directors. The person who gets that role would be responsible for integrating our analytics platform across all their client services. Are you interested in being considered for that position? The magnitude of what she was offering hit me like a tsunami. In the span of one afternoon, I had gone from facing demotion and possible termination to being offered a path to executive leadership at a major corporation. But the best part was still to come. Of course, Linda continued with a slight smile, we'll need to address David's situation immediately. Given the evidence you've provided, we have no choice but to terminate his employment for cause. Since you'll be taking over his responsibilities, I thought you might want to deliver the news personally. The next morning, I arrived at the office early and spent an hour preparing for what would be the most satisfying conversation of my professional life. I had practiced what I would say, how I would handle his inevitable denials and accusations, and how I would maintain my professionalism while delivering the justice he so richly deserved. David arrived at his usual time, strutting through the office with his typical arrogance, completely unaware that his world was about to implode. I watched him settle into his corner office, turn on his computer, and start his daily routine of checking emails and planning how to take credit for other people's work. At exactly 9 o'clock, I knocked on his door and walked in without waiting for permission. David, we need to talk. He looked up from his computer with irritation. Sarah, I thought we settled things yesterday. I don't have time for more of your dramatics. Actually, I said, settling into the chair across from his desk and placing a folder in front of him. Yesterday was just the beginning. Today is when we finish the conversation. The folder contained his termination letter, a detailed account of the evidence against him, and information about the legal consequences he would face if he attempted to interfere with the transition process. But what made the moment truly perfect was the letterhead on the termination notice. It bore my name with the title Marketing Director and was signed by Linda Watson. David stared at the documents for a full minute before looking up at me with an expression of complete bewilderment. This is a joke, right? You're actually trying to fire me? Sarah, you don't have the authority to fire anyone. You're barely qualified to empty the trash cans. Read the letterhead again, David. Carefully this time. His eyes widened as the reality of the situation finally penetrated his arrogance. This is impossible. Linda would never. You must have forged this somehow. Why don't you call her and ask? I suggested helpfully. I'm sure she'd be happy to explain the situation to you personally. The next few minutes were a masterclass in watching someone's entire worldview collapse in real time. David frantically called Linda's office, only to be told that she was in meetings all day and couldn't be disturbed. He tried calling Rebecca Torres, who informed him that all questions about his employment status should be directed to HR. When he finally reached Tom Bradley, the conversation was brief and decidedly one-sided. This can't be happening, David muttered, more to himself than to me. I built this department. I made it successful. You can't just walk in here and take everything I've worked for. Actually, David, that's exactly what you did to me for 3 years. The only difference is that what I'm taking actually belongs to me. I stood up and walked toward his office door. You have until the end of the day to clear out your personal belongings. Security will escort you out at 5 o'clock sharp. As I reached the door, I turned back for one final observation. Oh, and David? That client meeting with Meridian Industries next week? The one where you are planning to present my Riverside Tech proposal as your own work? I'll be handling that personally now. I'm sure they'll be thrilled to finally work directly with the person who's been creating their campaigns all along. The look of absolute defeat on his face was everything I had hoped it would be and more. 3 years of accumulated humiliation, stolen credit, and suppressed potential had finally been balanced by a single moment of perfect justice. Walking out of that office, past the cubicles and conference rooms where I had endured countless indignities, I felt a sense of liberation that was almost overwhelming. The other employees were starting to notice that something significant had happened, but the full story would have to wait until the official announcement later that day. My first act as marketing director was to call a department meeting where I explained the transition, introduced myself as their new leader, and outlined my vision for rebuilding the team culture around collaboration, recognition, and shared success. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had suffered under David's toxic management style. Maria Santos, our junior designer, approached me after the meeting with tears in her eyes. "Sarah, I can't believe this is really happening. David told me last month that my portfolio work wasn't good enough for client presentations, but I saw him use my designs in the Henderson Industries proposal without crediting me." Similar stories emerged throughout the day, as team members felt safe for the first time to share their experiences of having their work stolen, their ideas dismissed, and their contributions minimized. It became clear that David's pattern of abuse extended far beyond what he had done to me. He had created a systematic culture of exploitation that had damaged the entire department's morale and productivity. The official announcement of David's termination and my promotion was sent out at 3 o'clock that afternoon. The response from other departments was overwhelmingly positive, with several colleagues mentioning that they had always wondered how David had managed to produce such high-quality work, given his obvious lack of technical expertise. James Park from IT stopped by my new office later that day with a knowing smile. "Sarah, I've been wondering when someone would finally figure out what David was doing. I've been tracking the file access logs for months, and it was obvious that all the innovative work was coming from your computer, not his." "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. "Who was I going to tell? David was everyone's golden boy, and you were just the junior employee who got the coffee orders. But I saved copies of all the logs, just in case someone eventually asked the right questions." By the end of that first week as marketing director, I had uncovered the full scope of the damage David had inflicted on the department. Beyond the credit theft and manipulation, he had been systematically undermining relationships with key clients, canceling training opportunities for team members, and blocking collaborative projects that might have showcased other people's talents. The turnaround was immediate and dramatic. With David's toxic influence removed, the team began producing work at a level that surprised everyone, including Linda Watson. The Riverside Tech proposal, which I was now free to present with proper attribution and technical accuracy, not only won the contract but exceeded the client's expectations so significantly that they requested an expansion of services worth an additional $800,000. 3 weeks after David's termination, Linda called me into her office with news that would complete my transformation from undervalued employee to executive leadership. TechVantage Corp had accelerated the acquisition timeline after reviewing our department's improved performance metrics and wanted to fast-track the digital innovation division launch. "Sarah," Linda said, "they want to meet with you next week to discuss heading the new division. The position comes with a base salary of $180,000, plus equity options and performance bonuses. You'd be working directly with their senior leadership team to integrate your analytics platform across their entire client base." The numbers were staggering compared to my previous $45,000 salary, but more importantly, the role represented everything I had dreamed of professionally: the opportunity to lead innovation, build something meaningful, and finally receive recognition for my contributions. The meeting with TechVantage's executive team was scheduled for the following Tuesday, exactly 1 month after I had delivered David's termination letter. As I prepared for what would be the most important presentation of my career, I couldn't help but reflect on how dramatically my life had changed in such a short period. David, meanwhile, had struggled to find new employment. Word travels quickly in Portland's business community. and his abrupt termination for cause had raised questions that he couldn't adequately answer. Several potential employers had called Summit Digital Solutions for references, and the responses they received were professionally neutral, but hardly enthusiastic. I learned through Rebecca Torres that David had tried to claim unemployment benefits, but his termination for documented misconduct had made him ineligible. He had also apparently consulted with an employment attorney about pursuing wrongful termination claims, but the overwhelming evidence of his credit theft and manipulation had made any legal action inadvisable. The TechVantage presentation went even better than I had hoped. Not only did they offer me the Digital Innovation Division leadership role, but they also requested exclusive licensing rights to expand my analytics platform internationally. The licensing deal alone was worth more than David's entire annual salary, and it came with ongoing royalty payments that would provide financial security for years to come. 6 months after walking out of David's office with his termination letter, I was sitting in the C-suite of TechVantage Corp's headquarters in Seattle, leading a team of 12 developers and analysts, with an annual compensation package that exceeded anything I had imagined possible when I was struggling in that cramped cubicle at Summit Digital Solutions. The final chapter of this story came when I received a LinkedIn message from David, sent 8 months after his termination. The message was a rambling attempt at reconciliation, claiming that he had, quote, learned from his mistakes, and asking if I might be willing to consider him for a position on my team. He mentioned that he was eager to work collaboratively and valued the contributions of all team members. I read the message twice, remembering the years of humiliation, stolen credit, and suppressed potential. Then I crafted a brief, professional response. David, thank you for reaching out. Unfortunately, we don't have any positions available that would be appropriate for your skill set. I wish you the best in your continued job search. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. It's simply living well and succeeding beyond your oppressor's wildest imagination. David had called me worthless, had tried to convince me that I would never amount to anything significant. Instead, his systematic abuse had inadvertently taught me the importance of documenting everything, building alliances, and never accepting less than I deserved. Today, my team at TechVantage has revolutionized how companies approach predictive analytics, and our platform is used by Fortune 500 companies around the world. The software that David once presented as his own creation now generates millions in revenue annually and has established me as a recognized leader in digital innovation. The lesson I learned from this experience isn't just about standing up to workplace bullies or fighting for proper recognition. It's about understanding your own worth and refusing to let anyone else define your potential. David saw me as a threat to his mediocrity, so he tried to suppress my talents to protect his own insecurity. But talent, like truth, has a way of eventually rising to the surface, no matter how much someone tries to bury it. The most ironic part of this entire story is that David's attempts to hold me back ultimately prepared me for much greater success than I would have achieved if he had simply been a decent manager. His theft of my work forced me to become meticulous about documentation. His public humiliations taught me to remain calm under pressure. His attempts to isolate me from advancement opportunities motivated me to seek out alternative paths to success. In trying to destroy my career, David inadvertently gave me all the tools I needed to build something far more substantial than either of us had imagined possible. And that, perhaps, is the most satisfying revenge of all, turning someone's worst intentions into the foundation for your greatest achievements. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I sat in my cramped cubicle at 6:47 a.m., staring at an email that had arrived overnight from David with the subject line, "Urgent corrections needed, client presentation today." My coffee had grown cold as I read through his list of improvements to the Henderson Industries proposal I had spent the entire weekend perfecting. Every strategic recommendation I had developed based on months of customer analysis had been either diluted or completely reversed, replaced with generic marketing approaches that ignored everything I had learned about Henderson's unique market position. The most frustrating part wasn't just that David had gutted my strategic framework. It was that he had done it with the casual confidence of someone who believed he was fixing obvious mistakes made by an inexperienced employee. His comments in the margins of my proposal included phrases like, "too complex for client understanding," "overly analytical approach," and, quote, "needs more conventional marketing wisdom." Reading those critiques, I felt the familiar mixture of anger and self-doubt that had become my constant companion over the past year. Henderson Industries manufactured specialized construction equipment for commercial projects, and their customer base consisted of experienced contractors who made purchasing decisions based on detailed technical specifications and long-term reliability data. My proposal had emphasized how their marketing should focus on engineering excellence, durability testing results, and case studies from major construction projects where their equipment had performed under demanding conditions. The messaging strategy I had developed would position Henderson as the premium choice for contractors who couldn't afford equipment failures on critical deadlines. David's improvements had transformed this focused approach into a generic campaign about innovative solutions and customer satisfaction that could have been applied to any company in any industry. The specific technical advantages that set Henderson apart from their competitors had been replaced with vague promises about exceeding expectations and, quote, delivering results. Most damaging of all, the budget allocation had been shifted away from trade publications and industry websites, where contractors actually researched equipment purchases, redirecting funds towards social media platforms where Henderson's target customers rarely spent time. I had tried to schedule a meeting with David the previous Friday to discuss the strategic direction for Henderson Industries, hoping to explain why my customer analysis suggested a different approach than his conventional marketing preferences. His assistant had informed me that he was too busy preparing for other client presentations, and that any concerns about the Henderson proposal should be communicated via email. The email I had sent outlining my reasoning for the technical messaging strategy had apparently been dismissed as overthinking from someone who didn't understand the bigger picture of client management. Sitting in my cubicle that Tuesday morning, surrounded by the evidence of David's systematic dismantling of my work, I felt the weight of professional invisibility that had been growing heavier with each passing month. This wasn't the first time he had overruled my strategic recommendations without discussion, and it wouldn't be the last. The pattern had become so predictable that I had started developing two versions of every proposal: the version based on my actual analysis of client needs, and the simplified version that I knew David would find more acceptable. The Henderson Industries presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m., which gave me less than 3 hours to implement David's changes and prepare materials that supported his modified strategy. The irony wasn't lost on me that I would spend my morning undermining my own professional judgment to ensure that David's presentation went smoothly, even though I believed his approach would ultimately fail to meet the client's needs. This had become my primary job function, making David's poorly conceived strategies appear professionally competent through detailed execution and comprehensive supporting materials. My desk phone rang at 7:15 a.m., interrupting my revision of the Henderson presentation materials. The caller ID showed David's extension, which was unusual since he rarely arrived at the office before 8:30 a.m. and typically communicated through his assistant for routine scheduling matters. When I answered, his voice carried the sharp edge of irritation that I had learned to recognize as a warning that someone had disappointed him and consequences would follow. "Sarah, I need you in my office immediately. We have a problem with the Morrison Industries quarterly report that needs to be resolved before I meet with their executive team this afternoon." The urgency in his tone suggested that whatever problem had emerged was both serious and somehow my responsibility to fix, despite the fact that I had submitted the Morrison report 2 days earlier with all the requested analysis and supporting documentation. Walking toward David's corner office, I passed the desks of colleagues who were beginning to arrive for their normal workday, unaware that my morning was already spiraling into crisis management mode. Rebecca Torres from senior management was leaving David's office as I approached, her expression suggesting that whatever discussion they had been having was both serious and unresolved. She nodded politely as we passed in the hallway, but her usually warm smile was replaced by the kind of professional neutrality that indicated sensitive business matters were being discussed at levels above my access. David's office door was open, and he was standing behind his desk with his back to the entrance, staring out at downtown Portland through his floor-to-ceiling windows. The Morrison Industries file was spread across his conference table, surrounded by printed emails and what appeared to be client correspondence that I hadn't seen before. His body language conveyed the kind of controlled tension that suggested he was dealing with a situation that threatened to escalate beyond his ability to manage through normal diplomatic channels. "Close the door and sit down," David said without turning around. "Morrison Industries is questioning the accuracy of our quarterly performance analysis. and they're specifically asking about discrepancies between our reported results and their internal tracking data. Apparently, their customer service team has been receiving complaints about campaign messaging that doesn't match what we told them to expect from customer responses. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, not because I had made errors in the Morrison analysis, but because I knew exactly what had happened and why the client was confused. My original quarterly report had identified significant problems with campaign performance, including messaging that was generating negative customer feedback and targeting strategies that were reaching the wrong demographic segments. However, David had insisted that I revise the report to present a more optimistic assessment that would maintain Morrison's confidence in our strategic direction. David, the discrepancies Morrison is identifying are exactly what I documented in my original analysis. The campaign performance has been below projections since the second month, and customer feedback has been consistently negative about the messaging approach. When you asked me to revise the report to emphasize positive trends, I warned you that Morrison's internal data would eventually reveal the actual performance metrics. His response was swift and defensive, delivered in the tone he used when he needed to establish that questioning his decisions was inappropriate and potentially insubordinate. Sarah, what Morrison Industries is questioning isn't our strategic direction, it's the accuracy of your analytical work. They're specifically asking whether our data collection methodology is sophisticated enough to provide reliable insights for a company of their size and complexity. This is about your competence as an analyst, not about strategic disagreements. The reframing of the situation was so audacious that for a moment I couldn't formulate a response. David was attempting to transform a problem created by his insistence on presenting misleading analysis into a question about my technical capabilities. The Morrison Industries quarterly report had been meticulously researched and accurately documented. The only inaccuracies were the ones David had demanded that I introduce to make the campaign appear more successful than it actually was. David, Morrison Industries has access to the same customer feedback data and performance metrics that I used in my analysis. If they're questioning our conclusions, it's because our reported results don't match their direct experience with customer responses and campaign effectiveness. The problem isn't with my methodology. It's that we told them the campaign was performing well when their own data shows it's failing to meet objectives. The silence that followed my explanation was filled with the kind of tension that indicated David was calculating whether to continue his attempt to blame me for the situation, or to acknowledge that his editorial changes to my report had created the client's confusion. His reflection in the window showed an expression of barely controlled anger, and I realized that my direct contradiction of his narrative had crossed a line that would have consequences beyond this immediate crisis. Sarah, I don't think you understand the seriousness of what's happening here. Morrison Industries represents a six-figure annual contract, and they're now questioning whether Summit Digital Solutions has the analytical capabilities to provide reliable strategic guidance. Your inability to accurately assess campaign performance has put our entire relationship with them at risk, and I need you to take responsibility for that, rather than trying to shift blame onto strategic decisions that are above your pay grade. The accusation was so fundamentally dishonest that I felt my professional composure beginning to crack. David was demanding that I accept responsibility for problems that had been created by his refusal to present accurate analysis to the client. More than that, he was threatening to make me the scapegoat for a client relationship crisis that could have been avoided if he had allowed me to communicate honest assessment of campaign performance. David, I have copies of my original analysis and all the revisions you requested. Morrison Industries is questioning our credibility because we presented misleading information, not because of errors in my analytical work. If you want to resolve this situation, we need to acknowledge the actual performance problems and develop strategies to address them, not continue pretending that the campaign is more successful than it actually is. His response revealed the full scope of how he viewed our professional relationship and my role within his department. Sarah, what you have are drafts of analytical work that required significant revision to meet professional standards for client communication. The final report that was submitted to Morrison Industries reflects my assessment of appropriate messaging and strategic emphasis, based on years of experience managing major client relationships. Your suggestion that we should present unfiltered analytical conclusions to clients demonstrates exactly why you're not ready for senior-level strategic responsibilities. The conversation had reached a point where continuing to argue would accomplish nothing except further damaging my already precarious position within David's department. He had made it clear that he intended to blame me for problems created by his decisions, and that any attempt to defend myself would be characterized as insubordination and professional immaturity. The Morrison Industries crisis would be resolved through whatever combination of apologies and strategic adjustments David believed would preserve the client relationship, and my role would be to accept responsibility for analytical shortcomings that had never actually existed. "What do you need me to do to prepare for your meeting with Morrison Industries this afternoon?" I asked, recognizing that my only option was to focus on damage control rather than continue trying to establish the truth about what had caused the client's concerns. David's relief at my capitulation was visible as his posture relaxed and his tone shifted from accusatory to managerial. "I need you to prepare a revised analysis that addresses their specific concerns about data accuracy and methodology. Focus on explaining our analytical framework in terms that will reassure them about our technical capabilities, and include additional supporting data that validates our strategic recommendations. Most importantly, I need you to acknowledge the areas where your initial analysis may have been incomplete or overly optimistic about campaign performance." The assignment was a masterpiece of professional manipulation, requiring me to publicly accept blame for problems I hadn't created while producing work that would enable David to resolve the crisis without acknowledging his role in creating it. The revised analysis would become part of Morrison Industries' permanent file, establishing a record that I had made errors requiring correction by senior management. Future performance reviews would reference this incident as evidence of analytical shortcomings that needed improvement through additional training and closer supervision. Returning to my cubicle with 3 hours to prepare materials for 2 critical client presentations, I felt the familiar sense of professional helplessness that had become my default emotional state when dealing with David's management style. The Henderson Industries presentation at 10 a.m. would require me to implement strategic changes that contradicted my professional judgment, while the Morrison Industries crisis response would require me to accept blame for problems created by David's editorial interference with my analytical work. The morning deadline pressure was complicated by a steady stream of interruptions from colleagues who needed assistance with their own projects, and assumed that my presence at my desk meant I was available for consultation. Maria Santos from the design team stopped by to ask for clarification about brand guidelines for a client whose campaign I had analyzed months earlier. James Park from IT needed help troubleshooting data export problems that were preventing him from generating reports for 3 different client accounts. Tom Bradley from HR wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss professional development opportunities that probably meant additional responsibilities without corresponding increases in authority or compensation. Each interruption required me to shift mental focus from the urgent deadline work to help solve problems that, while legitimate and important, weren't my primary responsibility and wouldn't be considered when evaluating my performance on the Henderson and Morrison deliverables. The constant task switching was exhausting and inefficient, but refusing to help colleagues would create interpersonal problems that could affect my ability to collaborate effectively on future projects. By 9:30 a.m., I had managed to implement most of David's requested changes to the Henderson Industries presentation while preparing preliminary materials for the Morrison Industries crisis response. The revised Henderson proposal bore little resemblance to the strategic framework I had originally developed, but it was professionally polished and supported by comprehensive data analysis that would make David's generic messaging appear more sophisticated than it actually was. The Morrison Industries materials were more challenging because they required me to craft explanations that acknowledged analytical shortcomings without explicitly admitting that David had demanded misleading revisions to my original assessment. The language had to be precise enough to satisfy Morrison's concerns about data accuracy, while vague enough to avoid documenting the specific ways that editorial changes had created the discrepancies they were questioning. David's assistant called at 9:45 a.m. to inform me that the Henderson Industries presentation had been moved to 10:30 a.m. due to scheduling conflicts, which provided an additional 30 minutes to refine the materials but also extended the morning's deadline pressure. The extra time allowed me to include additional supporting data that would strengthen David's strategic recommendations, even though I remained convinced that his approach was fundamentally misaligned with Henderson's actual needs and market position. The Henderson Industries presentation took place in Conference Room A, Summit Digital Solutions' largest meeting space, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Portland skyline and technology that allowed seamless integration of digital presentations with printed materials. Henderson's executive team consisted of 3 senior managers who had worked in the construction equipment industry for decades and clearly understood both the technical specifications of their products and the purchasing behavior of their contractor customers. David's presentation was polished and confident, seamlessly integrating my analytical work into a strategic narrative that emphasized broad market opportunities and innovative messaging approaches. He explained how Summit Digital Solutions' comprehensive market research had identified untapped customer segments that could significantly expand Henderson's revenue base, and how our creative strategy would position their equipment as the premium choice for contractors who valued cutting-edge technology and superior performance. The Henderson executives listened politely but asked pointed questions that revealed their skepticism about David's strategic direction. Their concerns focused on the disconnect between our proposed messaging strategy and their direct experience with customer priorities and equipment purchasing decisions. When David described our social media engagement strategy for reaching younger contractors, Henderson's operations manager mentioned that their customer surveys consistently showed that equipment purchases were made by experienced project managers who relied on industry publications and peer recommendations rather than social media platforms. The most uncomfortable moment came when Henderson's CEO asked David to explain how our customer analysis had led to conclusions that contradicted their own internal research about contractor purchasing behavior. David's response relied heavily on general principles about evolving market trends and demographic shifts, avoiding specific references to the detailed customer data I had analyzed and the insights that had informed my original strategic recommendations. By the end of the presentation, it was clear that Henderson Industries remained unconvinced about our strategic direction, though they agreed to review our proposal and provide feedback within a week. The polite but unenthusiastic response suggested that David's revisions to my customer-focused strategy had failed to address the client's actual needs and concerns. Walking back to our offices after the Henderson presentation, David's assessment of the meeting was characteristically optimistic, despite the client's obvious reservations. He explained that sophisticated clients often needed time to appreciate innovative strategic approaches, and that Henderson's questions indicated engagement rather than rejection. The lukewarm response was simply evidence that our recommendations challenged their conventional thinking in ways that would ultimately prove valuable once they had time to consider the broader implications. I listened to David's interpretation without comment, recognizing that pointing out the disconnect between his assessment and the client's actual responses would accomplish nothing except creating additional tension before the Morrison Industries crisis meeting. The pattern was familiar. David's confidence in his strategic decisions remained unshaken by client feedback that suggested fundamental problems with his approach. The Morrison Industries meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., providing a brief window for lunch and final preparation of crisis response materials. I spent the time reviewing client correspondence and preparing answers to anticipated questions about analytical methodology and data accuracy. The goal was to provide explanations that would restore Morrison's confidence in our technical capabilities while avoiding admissions that could create legal liability for misleading reporting. Morrison Industries' executive team arrived at Summit Digital Solutions with expressions that conveyed serious concern about our ongoing business relationship. Jennifer Walsh, their chief marketing officer, carried a folder of materials that presumably contained their internal analysis of campaign performance and documentation of the discrepancies that had prompted this emergency meeting. The atmosphere in Conference Room B was formal and tense, lacking the collaborative energy that typically characterized client meetings. David began the meeting with an acknowledgement that Morrison Industries had identified inconsistencies between our performance reporting and their internal tracking data, emphasizing Summit Digital Solutions' commitment to analytical accuracy and transparent client communication. He explained that we had conducted a comprehensive review of our methodology and identified areas where our analytical framework could be refined to provide more precise performance measurement. The presentation that followed was a careful balance of technical explanation and diplomatic damage control, positioning the reporting discrepancies as opportunities for methodological improvement rather than evidence of misleading analysis. David described enhanced data collection procedures and revised analytical models that would provide more accurate performance assessment for future campaign evaluation. Morrison Industries' response was professional but skeptical, with multiple executives asking detailed questions about how our enhanced methodology differed from the approaches that had produced the questionable results they were investigating. Jennifer Walsh specifically requested documentation of our analytical procedures and timeline for implementing the improvements David had described. The most challenging moment came when Morrison's operations director asked me directly about the specific factors that had led to overestimation of campaign performance in our quarterly report. The question required me to provide an explanation that acknowledged analytical shortcomings without revealing that David had demanded optimistic revisions to my original assessment. My response focused on technical aspects of data interpretation and statistical modeling, emphasizing areas where additional analysis could provide more robust performance measurement. The explanation was accurate but incomplete, avoiding the fundamental issue that our reporting problems had been created by editorial changes rather than analytical errors. By the end of the meeting, Morrison Industries had agreed to continue their contract with Summit Digital Solutions, but with modified reporting requirements and enhanced oversight procedures that would prevent future discrepancies between our assessments and their internal tracking data. The resolution preserved the client relationship, but established additional accountability measures that would constrain David's ability to demand misleading revisions to future analytical reports. The combination of the Henderson Industries presentation and Morrison Industries crisis meeting had consumed the entire day and highlighted the fundamental dysfunction in my working relationship with David. Both situations had required me to implement strategic decisions that contradicted my professional judgment, while accepting responsibility for problems created by his management approach. The afternoon brought a cascade of additional demands that illustrated the systematic way David's leadership style created crisis management situations that other team members were expected to resolve. Maria Santos forwarded an urgent email from Cascade Coffee requesting explanation of budget overruns that exceeded approved limits by 37%. James Park reported technical problems with the analytics dashboard that 3 different clients used to monitor campaign performance in real time. Rebecca Torres scheduled an emergency meeting with our department to discuss performance consistency issues that were affecting multiple client relationships simultaneously. Each crisis could be traced to decisions David had made without consulting the team members who would be responsible for implementation, or problems created by his tendency to promise clients deliverables that exceeded our actual capabilities and timeline constraints. The pattern of creating problems through poor decision-making and then demanding that subordinates resolve them through intensive crisis management had become the normal operating procedure for our department. The most frustrating aspect wasn't just the constant firefighting, but the way David consistently framed these situations as evidence of performance problems among team members, rather than acknowledging his role in creating unsustainable client expectations. Performance reviews invariably referenced our department's tendency toward crisis management, without recognizing that the crises were symptoms of leadership failures, rather than analytical or execution shortcomings. Working until nearly 8 p.m. to prepare materials for the next day's client meetings, I found myself surrounded by colleagues who were also staying late to address urgent problems that could have been prevented by better planning and more realistic client communication. The overtime work was unpaid and unacknowledged, but refusing to stay late would result in missed deadlines that would be attributed to time management failures rather than unrealistic scheduling demands. The evening commute provided time to reflect on the day's events and the broader pattern they represented. The Henderson Industries presentation had failed because David's strategic recommendations ignored comprehensive customer analysis in favor of generic marketing approaches. The Morrison Industries crisis had emerged because David demanded misleading reporting that created credibility problems when clients compared our assessments to their own data. Both situations illustrated how his management style systematically undermined the quality of our client service while creating performance problems that were blamed on team execution rather than strategic decision-making. The most demoralizing realization was that this pattern wasn't accidental or temporary. It was the established system through which David maintained his authority, while ensuring that credit for successes went to his strategic leadership, and blame for failures was distributed among team members who were responsible for implementation. The system was sophisticated and sustainable precisely because it created plausible explanations for poor performance that didn't threaten David's position or reputation within Summit Digital Solutions' senior management structure. The emergency email from our largest client, Meridian Industries, arrived at 7:23 a.m. on a Thursday morning that would forever divide my career into before and after. The subject line was stark and terrifying. Urgent, campaign performance issues, immediate response required. My stomach dropped as I opened the message from Jennifer Walsh, Meridian's Chief Marketing Officer, a woman whose approval could make or break careers in our industry. Sarah, we need to discuss serious concerns about the digital transformation campaign launched last month. Our preliminary data shows conversion rates 40% below projected targets, and customer feedback indicates fundamental misalignment with our brand messaging. We're scheduling an emergency review meeting for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please prepare a comprehensive analysis of what went wrong and your recommended corrective actions. This represents a $3.2 million annual contract that is now in jeopardy. The blood drained from my face as I read those words. The digital transformation campaign was David's latest masterpiece, a project he had personally overseen from concept to execution, while relegating me to what he called data entry and basic administrative support. For 6 weeks, I had watched him make decisions that contradicted everything I knew about Meridian's customer base, their brand values, and their market positioning. Every time I had tried to raise concerns or suggest alternative approaches, David had shut me down with his usual condescending dismissal. I remembered the exact moment when I had realized the campaign was heading for disaster. It was during the creative review meeting, where David had presented his vision for Meridian's new digital presence. The strategy focused heavily on millennials' social media engagement and trendy visual aesthetics that completely ignored Meridian's core demographic of established professionals aged 35 to 55. When I had quietly mentioned that our customer analysis showed 78% of Meridian's revenue came from clients who valued trust, reliability, and professional expertise over flashy social media presence, David had literally laughed. "Sarah, you're thinking too small," he had said in front of the entire creative team. "We're not just managing their current customer base, we're expanding their market reach to capture the next generation of consumers. Sometimes you have to take risks to achieve real growth." The dismissive way he waved his hand while saying it made me feel like a child who had interrupted an adult conversation with naive questions. But I knew Meridian Industries better than David ever bothered to learn. I had been their unofficial point of contact for 2 years, handling their quarterly performance reviews, analyzing their customer satisfaction surveys, and developing the incremental improvements that had steadily increased their market share. The relationship I had built with their team was based on understanding their conservative corporate culture and their commitment to gradual, sustainable growth rather than dramatic market pivots. The morning after receiving Jennifer's emergency email, I spent 3 hours conducting a detailed analysis of the campaign's performance metrics. The results were even worse than I had feared. Not only were conversion rates catastrophically low, but the campaign had actually driven away some of Meridian's most loyal customers. The comment section of their social media posts was filled with longtime clients expressing confusion and disappointment about the sudden shift away from the professional, trustworthy image they had come to associate with the brand. The most damaging element was a series of video advertisements that David had personally scripted and approved. The videos featured young, trendy actors in casual clothing, discussing financial planning and investment strategies in coffee shops and co-working spaces. The messaging emphasized disrupting traditional finance and revolutionizing how professionals think about money. For a company that had built its reputation on decades of conservative, reliable financial guidance, the campaign represented a complete betrayal of their core brand identity. I printed out the analytics reports, customer feedback summaries, and social media response data, creating a comprehensive file that documented the scope of the disaster. As I organized the evidence, a terrible realization began to form. This wasn't just a failed campaign that could be adjusted or improved. This was a fundamental misunderstanding of the client's needs that threatened to destroy a relationship that had taken years to build. The emergency meeting with Meridian Industries was scheduled for 2 p.m. in our main conference room. David had spent the morning preparing his presentation, confident that he could explain away the poor performance, and convince Jennifer Walsh that the campaign simply needed more time to show results. I had watched him practice his talking points, emphasizing the innovative approach and forward-thinking strategy that would eventually prove successful once the market adapted to Meridian's new positioning. At 1:45 p.m., I knocked on David's office door with the analytics file tucked under my arm. "David, before the meeting starts, I think you should review these performance metrics. The situation is worse than we initially thought." He barely looked up from his laptop. "Sarah, I don't have time for your doom and gloom analysis right now." Jennifer Walsh is a sophisticated marketing professional who understands that breakthrough campaigns sometimes face initial resistance. She's not going to panic over a few negative comments from people who are resistant to change. "David, this isn't about resistance to change. The campaign is fundamentally misaligned with their customer base. We've alienated their core demographic while failing to attract the new audience we were targeting." I placed the file on his desk, but he didn't even glance at it. "Look, I appreciate your concern, but I've been managing major client relationships since before you graduated college. I know how to handle Jennifer Walsh, and I know how to salvage challenging situations. Your job is to support my strategy, not second-guess decisions that are above your pay grade." The dismissive tone in his voice was familiar, but this time it carried an edge of genuine irritation. David was clearly feeling pressure about the meeting, but his response was to double down on his authority, rather than acknowledge the possibility that his strategy had been flawed from the beginning. Jennifer Walsh arrived precisely at 2 p.m., accompanied by 2 members of her team, and an expression that could have frozen boiling water. She was a woman in her early 50s with silver hair and the kind of professional demeanor that commanded immediate respect. I had worked with her indirectly for 2 years and had always admired her directness and strategic thinking. Today, however, her usual warmth had been replaced by barely controlled anger. "David, Sarah," she said curtly, as she took her seat at the head of our conference table. "I assume you've both reviewed the campaign performance data and understand why we're here." David launched into his prepared presentation with characteristic confidence. "Jennifer, I want to start by acknowledging that the initial response hasn't met our optimistic projections. However, I believe we're seeing the natural resistance that occurs when an established brand makes a bold strategic pivot. The data shows engagement is high among the target demographic, and I'm confident that conversion rates will improve as the market becomes more familiar with Meridian's evolved positioning." Jennifer's expression didn't change throughout David's 10-minute presentation. When he finished, she pulled out her own folder and spread several documents across the table. "David, I need you to explain something to me. According to our internal analysis, your campaign has resulted in a 23% decrease in qualified leads, a 31% increase in customer service complaints, and the cancellation of 14 major client accounts. How exactly does this represent successful engagement with our target demographic?" David's confident facade began to crack slightly. "Well, Jennifer, any major strategic shift involves some temporary disruption of existing patterns. The clients who canceled were likely not aligned with Meridian's future vision anyway. Sometimes you have to lose customers who are holding you back in order to gain customers who will drive growth." "David," Jennifer's voice was ice cold, "the clients who canceled represent $8 million in annual revenue. These weren't marginal accounts. These were some of our most profitable long-term relationships. And according to their exit interviews, they canceled specifically because they felt Meridian was abandoning the professional, conservative approach that had originally attracted them to our services." The silence in the room was deafening. David opened his mouth to respond, but Jennifer continued before he could speak. "Furthermore, your campaign's focus on attracting younger clients has been completely unsuccessful. Our analytics show that 89% of the new inquiries generated by the campaign came from individuals who don't meet our minimum asset requirements for our core services. We've spent $400,000 to attract prospects who can't afford our products, while driving away clients who are generating substantial revenue." I watched David's face cycle through confusion, denial, and the beginning of panic as the full scope of the disaster became clear. This wasn't a campaign that needed adjustment. This was a strategic failure that threatened Meridian's fundamental business model and our agency's most important client relationship. Jennifer turned to me with an expression that was slightly less severe. "Sarah, I've been told that you handle our quarterly performance analysis and customer satisfaction reviews. What's your assessment of the campaign's alignment with our established customer base and brand positioning? This was the moment I had been dreading and anticipating simultaneously. David was staring at me with an expression that clearly communicated his expectation that I would support his narrative and help minimize the damage. But Jennifer Walsh was asking for my professional opinion about a campaign that I had privately opposed from the beginning, and my responsibility was to provide honest analysis rather than protect David's ego. Jennifer, based on the customer data and satisfaction surveys from the past 2 years, I believe the campaign represents a fundamental misunderstanding of Meridian's competitive advantages and customer expectations. I pulled out my own analysis and began walking through the key points. Your core customers choose Meridian because they value stability, expertise, and conservative growth strategies. The campaign's emphasis on disruption and revolutionary change directly contradicts the trust-based relationship that generates 78% of your revenue. David's face was turning red, but I continued. Additionally, the demographic targeting was based on aspirational goals rather than realistic market analysis. The younger consumers we were trying to attract typically use robo-advisors and low-cost investment platforms, not full-service financial planning firms. We essentially spent significant resources pursuing customers who were never going to convert while alienating the customers who actually drive your profitability. Jennifer nodded slowly as I spoke, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific data points or customer feedback trends. It was clear that my analysis aligned with her own internal assessment of the campaign's failures. Sarah, this matches exactly what our customer service team has been reporting. The question now is how we can salvage the relationship with our core customer base and restore the brand positioning that made Meridian successful. David finally found his voice, but it carried a note of desperation that I had never heard before. Jennifer, I think we're being overly negative about what is essentially a short-term adjustment period. Sarah's analysis focuses on historical data rather than future growth potential. If we give the campaign more time and perhaps make some minor modifications to the messaging, I'm confident we can achieve the breakthrough results we originally projected. Jennifer's response was swift and final. David, there won't be any more time for this campaign. We're terminating the current strategy immediately and returning to our previous positioning. The question is whether Summit Digital Solutions is capable of managing that transition, or whether we need to transfer our account to an agency that better understands our business model. The threat was unmistakable. Meridian Industries wasn't just canceling a failed campaign. They were considering ending their entire relationship with our agency. The loss of a $3.2 million annual contract would be devastating for Summit Digital Solutions, and the reputation damage in Portland's business community would make it difficult to attract comparable clients in the future. Of course, we can manage the transition, David said quickly. I'll personally oversee the development of a new strategy that returns to Meridian's traditional positioning while incorporating the lessons we've learned from this experience. Jennifer looked at him skeptically. David, given the scope of this failure, I'm not comfortable having you personally oversee the recovery strategy. I need someone who demonstrably understands our customer base and has a track record of successful campaign management. She turned to me with an expression that was almost hopeful. Sarah, would you be willing to lead the development of a new campaign strategy? Based on your analysis today and your historical work with our account, I believe you're the right person to restore our brand positioning. The request hit me like a lightning bolt. Jennifer Walsh was essentially asking me to take over David's role as lead strategist for Meridian's account, in front of David himself, during a meeting where his strategic failures had been thoroughly exposed. The professional implications were staggering, but the personal vindication was even more significant. David's voice cracked slightly as he responded. Jennifer, I appreciate your confidence in Sarah's analytical abilities, but account management and strategic development require experience that she simply doesn't have yet. As department director, I'm ultimately responsible for all client relationships, and I wouldn't feel comfortable delegating that responsibility for such an important account. David, Jennifer's tone was sharp. Your responsibility as department director is exactly why we're in this situation. Sarah's analysis demonstrates a level of strategic thinking and customer understanding that was completely absent from the original campaign development. I'm not making a request, I'm stating the terms under which Meridian Industries will continue our relationship with Summit Digital Solutions. The ultimatum was clear. Either I would lead Meridian's account recovery, or they would take their business elsewhere. David was facing a choice between accepting a humiliating demotion of his authority or losing the agency's most important client entirely. His face cycled through rage, disbelief, and finally a grudging recognition that he had no leverage in this negotiation. "Of course," David said through gritted teeth. "Sarah can take the lead on developing the recovery strategy. I'll provide oversight and support to ensure the project meets our quality standards." Jennifer's slight smile suggested that she recognized the diplomatic fiction in David's response. "Excellent. Sarah, I'd like to schedule a follow-up meeting for early next week to review your initial recommendations. And I want to be clear that going forward, all communications about Meridian's account should go directly to you, not through department channels." The meeting concluded with scheduling discussions and logistical details, but the fundamental power dynamic had been permanently altered. Jennifer Walsh had effectively transferred authority for a $3.2 million account from the department director to the junior employee he had spent months dismissing as inexperienced and naive. As Jennifer and her team gathered their materials and prepared to leave, she made one final comment that sealed David's humiliation. "Sarah, I want you to know that our customer service team has consistently reported positive feedback about their interactions with you over the past 2 years. Several of our major clients have specifically mentioned their appreciation for your thorough analysis and professional communication. I should have insisted on working directly with you much sooner." After the Meridian team left, David and I sat in the conference room, surrounded by the wreckage of his strategic failure and the evidence of my unexpected elevation to account leadership. The silence stretched for several minutes before David finally spoke, his voice tight, with barely controlled anger. "Sarah, I hope you understand that this doesn't change our fundamental working relationship. You may be handling day-to-day communications with Meridian, but you're still part of my team, and you'll still report to me on all strategic decisions." Jennifer Walsh was clearly upset today, but once emotions cool down, normal reporting structures will resume. I looked at David carefully, recognizing that he was trying to salvage some authority from a situation that had completely undermined his credibility. "David, I think the important thing right now is developing a recovery strategy that restores Meridian's confidence in our agency. I'll keep you informed about the progress, but my primary responsibility is to deliver results that meet their expectations." The diplomatic language couldn't disguise the reality that our professional relationship had fundamentally shifted. David was no longer the confident authority figure who could dismiss my input or take credit for my work. He was now dependent on my success to preserve his own position and the agency's most important client relationship. Over the following weekend, I worked 18-hour days developing a comprehensive recovery strategy for Meridian Industries. The plan involved immediately suspending all current campaign activities, conducting individual outreach to alienated customers, and developing new messaging that explicitly returned to Meridian's traditional positioning of trust, expertise, and conservative growth. The strategy also included a detailed analysis of how the original campaign had gone wrong, with specific recommendations for preventing similar failures in the future. I was careful to present the analysis professionally rather than as a personal attack on David, but the implications were clear. The disaster had resulted from ignoring customer data, misunderstanding brand positioning, and pursuing demographic targets that were incompatible with the client's business model. Monday morning brought a new dynamic to the office. Word had spread quickly about the Meridian crisis and my unexpected promotion to account leadership. Colleagues who had previously treated me as David's assistant were now approaching me directly with questions and suggestions. The shift in how people interacted with me was subtle but unmistakable. I was no longer seen as a junior employee, but as someone with real authority and client relationships. David's behavior had also changed dramatically. The casual arrogance and dismissive comments that had characterized our previous interactions were replaced by a careful politeness that felt almost more insulting than his previous condescension. He was clearly struggling to reconcile his view of me as a subordinate with the reality that I now controlled the agency's most important client relationship. The recovery meeting with Jennifer Walsh was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon, and I spent Tuesday evening rehearsing my presentation and anticipating potential questions. This was my opportunity to prove that the confidence she had shown in me was justified. and the pressure was enormous. If the recovery strategy failed, both Meridian's account and my newfound credibility would be destroyed. Wednesday's presentation went better than I had dared to hope. Jennifer and her team were impressed with the thoroughness of my analysis and the specificity of my recovery recommendations. More importantly, they were relieved to see that someone at Summit Digital Solutions had a clear understanding of their business model and customer expectations. Sarah, this is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we expected when we first contracted with your agency, Jennifer said after reviewing my presentation materials. I'm approving your recovery plan and authorizing an additional $200,000 budget for the corrective campaigns. I'm also comfortable extending our annual contract for another 2 years, assuming the recovery efforts achieve their projected results. The contract extension was worth $4 million over 2 years, making it the largest client commitment in Summit Digital Solutions history. My recovery strategy hadn't just saved the relationship, it had actually expanded it beyond the original scope. The professional vindication was overwhelming, but the personal satisfaction of proving my capabilities was even more significant. David had not been invited to the Wednesday meeting, a deliberate exclusion that sent a clear message about his reduced role in the client relationship. When I returned to the office with news of the contract extension and increased budget, his congratulations were strained and obviously forced. That's excellent news, Sarah. I'm glad Jennifer was receptive to our recovery strategy. I assume you'll need my input on implementing the new campaigns and managing the expanded timeline. The way he said our recovery strategy was a transparent attempt to claim partial credit for work he had played no role in developing. Actually, Jennifer specifically requested that I maintain direct oversight of all Meridian activities. She wants to ensure consistency in the strategic approach and avoid any confusion about accountability. David's face flushed, but he maintained his diplomatic facade. Of course, I'm sure you'll do an excellent job managing such an important responsibility. The following weeks brought a cascade of changes that transformed not just my role but the entire dynamic of the marketing department. Other clients began requesting to work directly with me after hearing about the Meridian recovery success. Rebecca Torres from senior management started including me in strategic planning meetings that had previously been limited to department directors. Most significantly, Linda Watson called me into her office for a conversation that would accelerate my career trajectory beyond anything I had imagined possible. Sarah, I've been watching your handling of the Meridian situation, and I'm impressed not just with your technical capabilities but with your leadership during a crisis, Linda said during our private meeting. I'm also aware that this success highlights some significant management issues within our marketing department that need to be addressed. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I'm considering some organizational changes that would better align our client management structure with demonstrated performance rather than traditional hierarchies. How would you feel about taking on expanded responsibilities that might include direct oversight of our major client relationships? The conversation that followed would set in motion events that would ultimately lead to David's downfall and my ascension to leadership of the entire marketing department. But at that moment, sitting in Linda Watson's office with the CEO of Summit Digital Solutions discussing my future, I realized that David's attempts to suppress my capabilities had actually created the perfect conditions for my dramatic emergence as a leader. The systematic way he had dismissed my input, stolen credit for my work, and underestimated my potential had forced me to develop documentation skills, strategic thinking, and client relationships that were now positioning me for opportunities he could never have imagined. His biggest mistake wasn't just failing with the Meridian campaign. It was creating the circumstances that would allow me to demonstrate capabilities that made his continued leadership untenable. The irony was perfect and devastating. In trying to keep me subordinate and invisible, David had inadvertently created the conditions for his own professional destruction and my emergence as his replacement. The first time I met David Mitchell was during my final semester at Portland State University, when Summit Digital Solutions came to campus for their annual recruitment presentation. I was 24 years old, buried under student loan debt, and desperately hoping to land an entry-level position that would justify 4 years of marketing coursework and countless unpaid internships. David stood at the front of the packed auditorium, wearing an expensive charcoal suit and projecting the kind of professional confidence that made every student in the room believe they were witnessing the pinnacle of career success. His presentation was flawless, filled with case studies of breakthrough campaigns and innovative strategies that had transformed struggling businesses into market leaders. He spoke about the mentoring opportunities at Summit Digital Solutions, the collaborative culture that fostered creative excellence, and the company's commitment to developing young talent into industry leaders. When he described the fast-track promotion possibilities for exceptional performers, I felt like he was speaking directly to me, offering the exact career trajectory I had been dreaming about throughout college. During the networking reception that followed, I approached David with my carefully rehearsed elevator pitch and a portfolio of academic projects that I hoped would demonstrate my potential value to his team. He listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions about my analytical approach to campaign development, and seemed genuinely impressed with a customer segmentation analysis I had completed for a local nonprofit organization. By the end of our conversation, he had invited me to apply for a position on his team, specifically mentioning that he was looking for someone with strong analytical skills and fresh perspectives. The interview process at Summit Digital Solutions was more rigorous than anything I had experienced, involving multiple rounds of presentations, case study analyses, and meetings with various department heads. David personally conducted the final interview, spending nearly 2 hours discussing my academic work, professional goals, and vision for the future of digital marketing. He explained that he was building a team of high-performing individuals who could think strategically while executing tactically, and he believed I had the potential to become a significant contributor to the agency's growth. When the job offer arrived, it exceeded my expectations in every way. The starting salary of $45,000 was competitive for entry-level positions. The benefits package included comprehensive health insurance and professional development opportunities, and the job description outlined clear pathways for advancement based on performance and results. Most importantly, David had specifically requested that I be assigned to his team, where I would have direct access to major client accounts and high-visibility projects that could accelerate my career development. My first day at Summit Digital Solutions felt like the beginning of everything I had worked toward throughout college. The office environment was exactly as professional and dynamic as David had described during his campus presentation, with sleek conference rooms, state-of-the-art technology, and an energy that suggested important work was happening at every desk. David introduced me to the team as a promising new addition who would be contributing to several ongoing campaigns while learning the sophisticated client management skills that separated good marketers from exceptional ones. The initial projects David assigned were challenging but manageable, requiring me to analyze customer data for existing clients and develop preliminary recommendations for campaign optimizations. He reviewed my work carefully, providing detailed feedback about industry best practices and suggesting refinements that would strengthen my analytical approach. During those first few weeks, I felt like I was receiving exactly the kind of mentorship I had hoped for when I chose to join his team, rather than accepting offers from larger agencies that might have offered higher starting salaries but less personal attention. The first client presentation I participated in was for Cascade Coffee, a regional chain that was struggling to compete with national franchises moving into the Portland market. David had spent weeks developing a comprehensive rebranding strategy, and my role was to present the customer analysis that supported his strategic recommendations. Standing in front of Cascade's executive team, explaining how demographic trends and purchasing patterns informed our creative direction, I felt like I was finally applying my education in a meaningful professional context. The presentation was a tremendous success, with Cascade's leadership enthusiastically approving David's strategy and praising the thoroughness of our market research. After the meeting, David pulled me aside to congratulate me on my contribution and to explain how successful client presentations were crucial for building the relationships that sustained long-term business growth. He emphasized that my analytical work had been instrumental in convincing the client to move forward with the campaign, and he assured me that this kind of collaboration would be the foundation of my career development at Summit Digital Solutions. For the first 6 months, this pattern continued exactly as David had promised during the recruitment process. I would conduct detailed analyses of client data, develop strategic recommendations based on market research, and present my findings to support David's overall campaign strategies. The work was intellectually stimulating, professionally challenging, and directly relevant to the career goals I had established during college. More importantly, I could see tangible results from my efforts as clients implemented our recommendations and achieved measurable improvements in their marketing performance. The Cascade Coffee campaign became our department's biggest success story that year, generating a 47% increase in customer acquisition and earning recognition from the Portland Business Journal as an innovative example of data-driven marketing strategy. During the awards ceremony, David delivered a speech about the importance of analytical rigor in campaign development, and he specifically acknowledged my contribution to the project's success. Standing on that stage, representing Summit Digital Solutions alongside David, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged professionally. The first subtle change in our working relationship occurred during the development of our second major campaign for Morrison Industries, a manufacturing company that needed help modernizing their customer communication strategy. I had spent several weeks analyzing their existing customer base and had identified some surprising patterns in purchasing behavior that suggested their current marketing approach was missing significant opportunities for growth. When I presented my findings to David, he listened carefully and asked detailed questions about my methodology and conclusions. However, when David presented the Morrison Industries strategy to our internal team, he described the analytical insights as collaborative discoveries that had emerged from our team's comprehensive market research. The way he phrased it wasn't technically inaccurate, since I was part of his team, and my work had contributed to the overall strategy development. But something about the presentation felt different from our previous collaborations, as if the specific credit for analytical innovation was being diffused into general team accomplishments, rather than attributed to individual contributions. I initially dismissed this feeling as professional inexperience on my part, assuming that senior-level strategy presentations naturally focused on team achievements rather than individual contributions. David had consistently praised my work in private conversations, and he continued to assign me increasingly complex analytical projects that suggested he valued my contributions to the team's success. When the Morrison Industries campaign achieved even better results than Cascade Coffee, generating national attention for Summit Digital Solutions, I felt proud to be part of such a high-performing team. The third major campaign of my first year involved developing a digital marketing strategy for Riverside Bank, a community financial institution that was losing market share to online banking platforms. This project required significantly more sophisticated analytical work than anything I had previously attempted, involving complex customer segmentation models and predictive analytics that would inform a comprehensive rebranding effort. David explained that Riverside Bank represented a potential breakthrough opportunity for our agency, since success with financial services clients could position Summit Digital Solutions for expansion into lucrative corporate markets. I threw myself into the Riverside Bank analysis with an intensity that surprised even me, working late nights and weekends to develop insights that would give David the strongest possible foundation for his strategic recommendations. The customer data revealed fascinating patterns about how different demographic groups responded to various types of financial messaging, and I was able to develop targeting algorithms that could significantly improve campaign efficiency while reducing customer acquisition costs. The breakthrough moment came when I discovered that Riverside Bank's most profitable customers were actually middle-aged professionals who valued personalized service and conservative financial advice, rather than the younger demographic that most banks were aggressively pursuing through social media campaigns. This insight suggested that Riverside Bank could differentiate itself by emphasizing traditional banking values while using modern technology to enhance customer service rather than replace personal relationships. When I presented this analysis to David, his excitement was obvious and immediate. He spent over an hour discussing the implications of my findings, asking detailed questions about the statistical models I had developed, and exploring how the insights could inform not just Riverside Bank's campaign, but our approach to financial services clients more broadly. By the end of our meeting, he was already outlining how this analytical framework could become a proprietary methodology that would set Summit Digital Solutions apart from other agencies competing for banking clients. The presentation to Riverside Bank's executive team was scheduled for the following week, and David spent several days preparing what he described as the most important pitch of his career. He explained that success with Riverside Bank could establish Summit Digital Solutions as the premier agency for financial services marketing in the Pacific Northwest, potentially leading to contracts with much larger institutions that would transform our business trajectory. The pressure was enormous. But David seemed confident that my analytical work provided exactly the kind of innovative insights that would convince Riverside Bank to choose our agency over the national firms they were also considering. On the morning of the Riverside Bank presentation, I arrived at the office early to make final preparations and ensure that all the supporting materials were perfectly organized. David had asked me to attend the meeting to answer any technical questions about the analytical methodology, which I interpreted as recognition of my expertise and an opportunity to gain direct experience with high-stakes client interactions. As we walked into the conference room where Riverside Bank's senior leadership was waiting, I felt like I was participating in exactly the kind of career-defining moment that had attracted me to Summit Digital Solutions. David's presentation was masterful, seamlessly integrating my analytical insights into a comprehensive strategic narrative that addressed every aspect of Riverside Bank's competitive challenges. He explained how customer segmentation analysis had revealed unexpected opportunities for market differentiation, described how predictive modeling could optimize campaign targeting and budget allocation, and outlined an implementation timeline that would deliver measurable results within 6 months. The Riverside Bank executives were clearly impressed with the sophistication of our approach and the specificity of our recommendations. During the question and answer session, several executives asked detailed questions about the analytical methodology and statistical models that supported our strategic recommendations. David fielded these questions expertly, demonstrating comprehensive understanding of the technical details while explaining complex concepts in terms that non-technical decision-makers could easily understand. When one executive specifically asked about the algorithms used for customer segmentation, David provided a detailed explanation that accurately reflected the work I had done, while positioning himself as the architect of the analytical framework. The meeting concluded with Riverside Bank's leadership expressing strong interest in moving forward with our proposal and requesting additional technical documentation that would support their internal decision-making process. As we gathered our materials and prepared to leave, the Senior Vice President of Marketing made a comment that I would remember for years afterward. David, your analytical approach represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need to compete effectively in today's banking environment. We're impressed with your personal expertise in customer analytics and predictive modeling. Walking back to our office after the successful presentation, David was exuberant about the client's response and optimistic about our chances of winning the contract. He praised my contribution to the project's success and explained how the analytical work I had developed would likely become a template for future financial services campaigns. However, something about the way Riverside Bank's executives had praised his personal expertise in areas where I had done the actual technical work left me feeling slightly unsettled, though I couldn't articulate exactly why. 2 weeks later, Riverside Bank officially selected Summit Digital Solutions to manage their rebranding campaign, signing a contract worth $800,000 over 18 months. The announcement was celebrated throughout our agency as validation of our innovative approach to financial services marketing, and David was promoted to Senior Marketing Director in recognition of his leadership on the successful pitch. During the company-wide meeting where the promotion was announced, Linda Watson specifically praised David's, quote, groundbreaking analytical methodology and his ability to, quote, transform complex data into compelling strategic narratives. My own recognition for the Riverside Bank success came in the form of a modest salary increase and a new title of marketing analyst, which David explained was an important step toward eventual promotion to senior-level positions. He assured me that my analytical contributions had been crucial to our success and that continued high performance on future projects would lead to additional advancement opportunities. The promotion felt like validation of my professional development, though I couldn't help noticing that the public recognition for analytical innovation had gone entirely to David rather than being shared with the team members who had actually developed the technical methodologies. The pattern became more pronounced during our fourth major campaign, developed for Pacific Northwest Tourism, a regional organization that needed help attracting visitors from California and international markets. This project required even more sophisticated analytical work than Riverside Bank, involving complex modeling of tourism patterns, seasonal variations, and competitive analysis of destination marketing strategies. I spent months developing algorithms that could predict optimal timing for different types of promotional campaigns and identify the most effective messaging strategies for various demographic segments. The insights that emerged from this analysis were genuinely groundbreaking, revealing counterintuitive patterns about how potential tourists made destination decisions and suggesting marketing approaches that contradicted conventional wisdom in the tourism industry. When I presented my findings to David, he immediately recognized their significance and began discussing how this analytical framework could position Summit Digital Solutions as the leading agency for destination marketing throughout the Western United States. However, when David presented the Pacific Northwest tourism strategy to our internal team, and later to the client, he described the analytical innovations as strategic insights that had emerged from his comprehensive market research and industry expertise. My specific contributions were acknowledged as valuable support work, but the conceptual breakthroughs and methodological innovations were attributed to David's leadership and strategic vision rather than to the detailed technical analysis I had conducted. The Pacific Northwest Tourism Campaign became our agency's most successful project to date, generating national media attention and establishing Summit Digital Solutions as an innovative leader in destination marketing. David received industry recognition for his quote to tourism analytics, including an invitation to speak at the National Destination Marketing Conference about advanced analytical methodologies. Watching him deliver that keynote presentation, explaining concepts and techniques that I had developed, I began to understand that something fundamental had changed in our professional relationship. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. David continued to assign me increasingly complex analytical projects and continued to praise my work in private conversations. However, the public recognition for innovation and strategic thinking consistently went to him, while my contributions were characterized as competent execution of his conceptual frameworks. During team meetings, client presentations, and industry events, David was positioned as the analytical genius who had revolutionized our agency's approach to data-driven marketing, while I was seen as the talented analyst who implemented his strategic vision. By the end of my first year at Summit Digital Solutions, this pattern had become our normal working relationship. I would spend weeks or months developing innovative analytical approaches to complex marketing challenges. David would integrate my work into comprehensive strategic presentations, and he would receive credit for the conceptual breakthroughs while I received acknowledgement for technical competence. The arrangement wasn't explicitly discussed, but it became the unspoken foundation of our collaboration on every major project. The psychological impact of this dynamic was subtle but persistent. I began to doubt my own assessment of my contributions, wondering whether I was overestimating the significance of my analytical work or failing to appreciate the complexity of translating technical insights into strategic narratives. David's expertise in client management and strategic communication was undeniable, and his ability to present complex concepts in compelling ways clearly added substantial value beyond the raw analytical work. Perhaps my role as the technical specialist who supported his strategic leadership was appropriate for my experience level and professional development stage. During my annual performance review, David provided overwhelmingly positive feedback about my analytical capabilities and strategic thinking. He explained that my work had been instrumental in establishing Summit Digital Solutions' reputation for innovative data-driven marketing, and he outlined clear pathways for continued advancement based on expanding responsibilities and increasingly complex project assignments. The review concluded with another salary increase and a commitment to consider me for promotion to senior analyst within the next 18 months, assuming continued high performance on major client accounts. The second year of my employment at Summit Digital Solutions followed the same pattern but with even higher stakes and more visible projects. David's promotion to marketing director had given him authority over multiple client accounts and a larger team of analysts and strategists. My role evolved to include oversight of junior analysts while continuing to personally handle the most complex analytical projects that supported David's strategic initiatives. The increased responsibility was professionally gratifying, and the opportunity to mentor newer employees provided insights into leadership skills that I hoped would prepare me for eventual advancement to management positions. However, the fundamental dynamic of our working relationship remained unchanged. I would develop innovative analytical frameworks, David would integrate them into strategic presentations, and he would receive recognition for thought leadership while I was acknowledged for technical expertise. The pattern had become so established that I stopped questioning it, accepting that this division of credit was simply how senior-level strategic work functioned in professional environments. The breaking point came during the development of our largest project ever, a comprehensive digital transformation strategy for Meridian Industries that would determine whether Summit Digital Solutions could compete for enterprise-level contracts worth millions of dollars annually. This project required analytical work that was exponentially more complex than anything I had previously attempted, involving integration of customer data, market research, competitive analysis, and predictive modeling that would inform a complete restructuring of Meridian's customer engagement approach. I spent 4 months developing the analytical foundation for this project, working 18-hour days and weekends to create models that could accurately predict customer behavior across multiple demographic segments and purchasing channels. The insights that emerged were genuinely revolutionary, suggesting that traditional approaches to customer acquisition in Meridian's industry were fundamentally flawed, and that completely different strategies could generate dramatically better results while reducing costs. When I presented my findings to David, his response was unlike anything I had experienced during our previous collaborations. Instead of the detailed questions and collaborative discussion that had characterized our past projects, he seemed primarily interested in understanding how to present the insights to Meridian's executive team in ways that would maximize the impact on contract negotiations. The focus had shifted from refining the analytical work to optimizing its presentation value, as if the technical methodology was less important than its persuasive potential. The presentation to Meridian Industries was scheduled as the culmination of months of relationship building and strategic positioning that David had been managing at the senior executive level. The contract under consideration was worth $2 million annually and would establish Summit Digital Solutions as a major player in enterprise digital marketing. David explained that success with Meridian could lead to similar contracts with other large corporations, potentially transforming our agency from a regional firm into a national competitor with Fortune 500 clients. On the morning of the Meridian presentation, David informed me that he had decided to handle the entire presentation personally, rather than including me in the client meeting. He explained that Meridian's executives preferred to work directly with senior leadership, and that my presence might suggest that Summit Digital Solutions was delegating important strategic work to junior-level employees. The analytical work I had developed would be central to his presentation, but the client interaction required the kind of senior-level strategic communication that was beyond my current experience level. Watching David prepare for that presentation, reviewing materials that represented months of my most sophisticated analytical work, I finally understood the complete scope of how our professional relationship had evolved. I was no longer a mentee being developed for future leadership. I had become a technical resource whose innovations enabled David's advancement, while my own career progression remained constrained by the perception that I was a supporting player rather than a strategic thinker. The Meridian presentation was initially successful, with David receiving praise for his innovative analytical approach and strategic vision. However, the campaign implementation that followed was a complete disaster, precisely because David's understanding of my analytical work was superficial rather than comprehensive. He had learned to present my insights convincingly without truly understanding the underlying methodology or the limitations that should have informed implementation decisions. When Meridian Industries contacted Summit Digital Solutions about the campaign's failure, demanding explanations and threatening to terminate their contract, David's first response was to blame external factors and suggest that the analytical methodology needed refinement. But the real problem was that he had implemented strategies based on incomplete understanding of complex analytical work, making decisions that contradicted the fundamental assumptions underlying my models. That crisis meeting with Meridian Industries became the moment when 3 years of accumulated frustration, suppressed recognition, and professional invisibility finally reached its breaking point. Jennifer Walsh's direct questions about campaign methodology exposed the gap between David's public expertise and his actual understanding of the work that had established his reputation. More importantly, her decision to transfer account authority to me represented recognition of capabilities that David had been systematically obscuring for years. Sitting in that conference room, watching David struggle to explain analytical concepts he had never fully understood, I realized that his success had been entirely dependent on my work, while my career had been constrained by his need to maintain the illusion of his own expertise. The moment Jennifer Walsh asked me to take over Meridian's account wasn't just an opportunity for professional advancement. It was validation of abilities that I had begun to doubt existed. The 3 years I had spent as David's analytical support had taught me everything I needed to know about client management, strategic communication, and organizational leadership. But more importantly, those years had shown me exactly how toxic leadership suppresses talent, steals credit, and creates systems that prioritize image over competence. David's mentorship had prepared me to replace him, though not in the way either of us had originally intended. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.